the flowing seas abroad, build my lofty sound. I sing the words of adoring the sun to rule the day. The moon shines full and God's command, all the stars obey. I sing the goodness of the Lord that fills the earth with good. God formed the creatures with a word, and then pronounced them good. Lord, how thy wonders are displayed, where I put my eye. If I survey the ground I tread, will gaze upon the sky.
Can we stand twice in one service for the last verse of the song? Let's stand again on the third verse. There's not
a land for flowery road, but makes thy glories known. As clouds arise and tinted with snow, thy order from thy throne. While all that borrows life from thee is ever in thy care. There's not a place where we can flee, where God is present there.
You may be seated. And turn again to page 299. 299, same book.
Once you hear the sermon, you'll know why we're singing about.
299, New Heavens, New Earth.
New earth, heavens new, Spirit of God moving. New sea, creatures new, Spirit of God moving. New land, woman new, image of God moving. Sing a new song to the one who has set thee. Oh, I make all things new. New love, mercies new, Spirit of God moving. New strength, hopefulness new, Spirit of God moving. New hearts, spirits new, image of God moving. Sing a new song to the one who has set thee. Oh, I make all things new. New life, wisdom new, Spirit of God moving. New song, covenant new, Spirit of God moving. New name, picture new, image of God moving. Sing a new song to the one who has set me whole. I make all things new. Heaven's new, Spirit of God moving. New world, returns to Spirit of God moving. New heaven new, image of God moving. Sing a new song to the one who has set me whole. I make all things new.
Now, we're saying about new. God is creating new things. Now we're going to go back and think about God creating things. So turn to your hymnals to 806. And this can even be for the children. You can help read this. And this is about God creating. God created mamas and daddies. He created man and female, male and female. But he also, there's children involved. Okay. We'll all read that first one together. 806. And the children are going to hear something special about God's creation. Okay? All of us together, and then I'll ring the light, and then all of you can help with the God. In the beginning,
when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while the wind from God swept over the face of the waters.
I'm going to read the light. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light.
And God said, "Let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." So God made the dome and separated the waters that were under the dome, and the waters that were above the dome.
And God said, "Let the waters under the sky be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear."
Then God said, "Let the earth put forth vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees of every kind on the earth that bear fruit with seed in it."
And God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." What were those lights up in the dome of the sky at night time when it's dark? What are the lights? Huh? Stars? What else? The moon. Yes. Okay. Now, okay, in God.
And God said, "Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the dome of the sky."
And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures of every kind, cattle and creeping things and wild animals of the earth of every kind."
And And God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that moves along the earth.
So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them.
God blessed them. God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good.
And in how many days did he create these things? How long? Because this is, it maybe took years and years, but according to the Bible, what does it say? Does anyone? 6 days.
Well, anyway, 7 is
But listen, that's what we want to bring up. The seventh day, it doesn't mention anything about the seventh day. What was the seventh day about? By the seventh day, God had finished all this work. And what did he do? God rested, blessed the day, and made it holy. And that's what?
Oh, hey, they made a Bible book out of Lego.
Okay.
Lego Bible.
Okay. So God rested, blessed the day, and made it holy. And in this part, we see about male and female. We are different. And what is it? Sung one day that really made me feel quite special. And I'm not more special than the rest of you are. And Aaron sang this song at the Peace Meeting. And I've asked him to sing this song as a song. And it's very meaningful. If you want to know we don't have the books out, just listen. He sings it.
I think you poured syrup on my back. I know. Yeah. Push it.
My soul is filled with joy as I sing to God, my Savior. You have looked upon your servant. You have visited your people, and holy is your name. Through all generations, everlasting is your mercy to the people you have chosen, and holy is your name. I am lowly as a child, but I know from this day forward that my name will be remembered, for all will call me blessed, and holy is your name. Through all generations, everlasting is your mercy to the people you have chosen, and holy is your name. I proclaim the power of God. You do marvels for your servants, though you scatter the proud-hearted and destroy the might of princes, and holy is your name. Through all generations, generations. Everlasting is your mercy to the people you have chosen, and holy is your name. To the hungry you give food, send the rich away empty. In your mercy you are mindful of the people you have chosen, and holy is your name. Through all generations, everlasting is your mercy to the people you have chosen, and holy is your name. In your love you now fulfill what you promised to your people. I will praise you, Lord, my Savior. Everlasting is your mercy, and holy is your name. Through all generations, everlasting is your mercy to the people you have chosen, and holy is your name.
Thank you, Aaron. We are all God's children. We all have work to do. Even especially the mamas and daddies who have these children. And now we're going to have children's time. So the children will come up. We have a story. Moses. How many of you were here when once before Moses had some of this? And he can't. So come on up here, Walter. He's just going to stay sitting there, I think. Are you? Hey, would you want to speak? You can sit down, coach, if you want to. That's up to you.
Well, when we lived in Canada, we had bears around our house. Now, bears aren't dangerous if you don't think you're gonna hurt their children. But if you left food out in their garbage can, you could be sure somebody's coming, and they're not very polite. If they see food, they'll just throw everything out, all your trash, to get to the food. Now, here's the bear. Would you like to hold it and hug it? Pass it around and hug it.
Hug the big bear like that big bear, mama bear, is hugging the little bear. You see the little bear there?
Pass it on.
There's someone sitting behind you. We want to remember her back there too. Go down the back row.
All right.
Can we have it now? Give a hug.
And we know the lady who made those things.
Now, look at the bear and try. Can you, you think the bear's happy? Would you try to look like the bear? Make.
So we didn't get to
That's a happy bear.
Yeah. Well, that was just about the bear. Now, here's another one. That's not a bear, that's a lion.
There are lions in their water.
And the other one is a lamb. Now, the lion is considered to be the king of the forest, isn't it? The lion isn't afraid of any other animal, is it? They think they can whip up anybody. And the lamb, you know, the lamb is a very different animal.
And also it's harsh. Yeah.
Now, a dog can bite you. A cat will scratch you if they get mad at you. A horse can kick you, but the lamb will never hurt you. The lamb does never hurt anybody. The lamb is perhaps the most peaceful animal there is. And the lion is the most ferocious. Now, we have a...
What about the blue whale?
Huh?
That'd be stronger.
But there's a story in the Bible, a dream from the prophet Isaiah. And he had an imagination. He had a vivid imagination. He imagined that the world could one day be a place where there would be no violence. And then the lamb could... You gonna get your Bible? Yeah. The lamb could just lay down with the lion. And normally the lion would eat the lamb. But now it's a different world. You want to read it, say? Now listen very carefully, because it talks about the lion and the lamb. And then you listen for the part of the children.
The wolf or the lion will live with the lamb, and a leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion, and the yearling together. And a little child will lead them.
Oh, did you hear that? Read that again.
A little child shall lead them.
I wonder why it says little child. Maybe only children can imagine the impossible. All right?
And so children are special.
Okay.
Now we're going to sing a song especially for children. Especially, okay? Go ahead. I am special.
Special God made me.
Special eyes for me to see, special legs to climb a tree.
Thank you, God, for
Making me.
Let's do it again. That's so short. And you were ready for it. Let's do it again.
I am special, God made me. Special eyes for me to see, special legs to climb a tree. Thank you, God, for making me.
And now we want to sing a song about turning around.
Now the adults can get into that too. And you can dream.
And I think you can just stay here while we sing this song.
And the world is about to turn.
No, in the purple song books, you have to I'll teach you 121. And then just after this,
What number?
124.
In the purple book?
In the purple book, number 124.
Children, you can just stay up here and then you can help with the offering.
Scary to do. Yeah.
My soul cries out with a joy
deserve it, God, in my weakness is not worth. From east to west shall the nation bless with the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you reign with the fire return. Watch away all tears when the dawn draws near and the world is about to turn. So wide and strong, my God, by all you work great things in me. And your mercy will last from the depths of the past to the end that we make to thee. Your death remain with the cross you shame unto those who adore you now. You will show your might with the storm to fight, for the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing when the day is reached, that the fire is gone. Wipe away our tears when the Lord draws near, and the world is about to turn. From the halls of power to the fortress proud, not a stone will be left unturned. Let the king beware, for your justice tears every tyrant from his throne. The hungry poor shall reap no more, for the food they can never earn. There are tables spread, every mouth be fed, for the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, that the fire is constant. Away all fears from the dawn comes in, and the world is about to turn. The nations praise from age to age, remember woman's past. God's mercy must deliver us from the conqueror's questing wrath. The saving hands that are for their turn, is the promise which holds us bound. Till the fear and wrath be crushed by God, who is turning the world around. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, that the fire is out. Away all tears to the dawn grows near, and the world is about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day you bring, that the fire is out. Away all tears for the dawn grows near, and the world is about to turn.
And the world will turn around when these young people, these children grow up. We're going to do what we can now to make this a better world. So let's take up the offering now. Will some of you come up to the This is for the church offering. This goes for the undocumented people. I love it.
No time, what's
And down in Texas. And this is for.
Hey, we got free money over here. Free money.
It goes into the big jar.
Two
And
per
if someone
cup.
want to help you, you can have these little ones.
This one
that
is
go
ours.
around and see if someone has some fingers.
Two.
Oh. Go ahead and
Two.
your mom and dad.
Here we go.
The last one is 4 per cup.
Yeah, I heard some pennies rattle.
Here, 4 per cup for money. When you're finished, try shaking.
Okay.
Here we go. Thank you.
Okay. Now we hold it up here. We thank you, dear.
Hold it up
God,
as high as you
for the people
can.
who were able to give. For the people who were not giving, that's fine. God, you love us all. And we thank you for this. And we pray that you will bless the money that has come in and you will help many people throughout the world. Amen. And now, the children, they lead us. We'll look for you to be back again. And we'll have James come up here. what he has to say. Thank you so much for being your faith.
I'm just not sure about where
And God do bless James as he speaks to us today. Open our hearts, our ears, and our eyes to see what you have for us. Absorb what he has to say. Do what we can to make this available. Amen.
Well, it is really good to be back here after being gone the last couple of weeks. I really missed everyone a lot, and it was nice getting reports from Becky telling me how things were going, but it's just not the same as being here. So I'm really, really excited to get to be here this morning. Well, for today's message, this is the second part of a 4-part series from my turns to preach. Been preaching on spiritual practices for the home context, things that we can do with our families or with our households together. But before I go into this message, I want to first talk a little bit about the last couple of weeks when I was traveling, because I got some really interesting stuff out of the classes that I went to, and I thought it might get some conversation started for us. So I want to begin with that. But then after that, we'll go into our primary message, which is focusing on the idea of Sabbath and how that can be translated into our context as followers of Jesus. So first, though, we'll tell a little bit about class. The first week of class was at the Mennonite Seminary in Elkhart, Indiana. My class was Theology 2. Now, I gotta admit, Theology 2, or the systematic way of doing theology, just frustrates me to no end. It's not the way my brain works. It's not the way that I like to think about theology. I like to think of it more in the narrative type of way. But nonetheless, it was a good stretch. And particularly what I liked about this class was it focused on mostly the theology of the church. What is the purpose of the church? How does the church do its work in the world? And especially looking at the question of the kingdom of God and noting how often Jesus taught the kingdom of God. What does that mean for us now? Is the kingdom of God coming in the future? Is the kingdom of God present right now? A lot of really good questions. A lot of good questions thinking about who we are as followers of Jesus. And so that certainly sparked a lot of thoughts for us in our conversations and our life here together. But it was the second class that really, really sparked some things for me. And that was a class I took in Heston, Kansas. AMBS, they have a Kansas Center class in Kansas sometimes. And this class was on the topic of rural ministry. Going into that, I needed a 1-hour class, to be honest. The main reason I took it, to fill up my schedule. I have to do 6 hours to be a half-time student. It was in a good location, good time, and all that. But I went into it thinking, I don't know how relevant this is going to be. I mean, we're an urban church. We're smack dab in the middle of Oklahoma City. How relevant will a class on rural ministry be? It turned out to be incredibly relevant for a few reasons. First of all, was that I came to understand through the class that the size of many rural churches is very similar to us, under 50 people. And so in the context of that kind of church where everyone has to participate, it's going to work. It's very different than a larger church where a good number of people can show up and be effectively spectators. They can watch but not really engage. In a church like this, I guess you could do that, but most people are going to participate. In a small community, we come because we want to step up. We want to be engaged. And so that's certainly a point of commonality. Also in this class, I was really struck by how important food issues are to the faith. And in this class, they talk about it a lot because in rural America, where is the food we eat grown in rural parts of the country? And so they talked about the incredible responsibility that comes from growing food and the incredible responsibility from taking care of land. And that, again, had a lot of resonances for us in our congregation. That while we may not be farmers, a lot of us are gardeners. There's a lot of food being grown. I mean, a lot of us are asking tough questions about the food we eat, how it impacts our lives. And so that was the point of commonality. Finally, though, the part that really intrigued me was the issue of place. A professor, the guy's name is Stan Kaufman. He's preached all over the Midwest, some in Saskatchewan, But most recently, he retired from Freeman, South Dakota, is where he's from originally. And so Stan, he talked a lot about how important a place is in doing ministry and how the temptation is to say, oh, the latest, greatest book you can buy at Mardell's, the Christian bookstore, the greatest church growth book will give us all the answers. The problem is that you take that book, it was written for a different kind of church. It doesn't translate. We have to, when we're doing the work of the church, we have to ask, well, what does church mean for us in this context, in this community? And he challenged us to really think hard about the issue of place. And of course, he talked a lot about how rural churches are rooted in a place at the margins. The areas of the industrialized world has ignored or exploited, but hasn't taken seriously. And that got me thinking about some more conversations we've had on the new monastic movement, the idea of living at the margins of empire, and made me realize that Joy Mennonite, our place here, is very instrumental to who we are, and that we are literally located on several boundary lines. You think about that, to the east is majority African-American neighborhoods. To the west, majority white neighborhoods. We are located in this little weird bubble that, and right along Lincoln Boulevard, very well-off, prosperous people. A block either direction, very poor people. Right here, this weird boundary line, worlds are colliding, and somehow we are kind of in the middle of that. But also think about, we're at the boundaries of propriety. And what I mean by that is, we're a church, and we meet in an old house. And not only that, but we're a church where people live. We have people that live upstairs in the church building. We have always been about kind of pushing the boundary lines of what it means to be in the place we are and what that means. In fact, this is what's really, and I got to grab a book real quick over here. I want to read from just a little bit. When I was up in Kansas, all the wonderful bookstores, and I found this book called Growing Faith, General Conference Mennonites in Oklahoma, edited by Wilma. Oh, it's in the library. Well, I have another copy now. But it's edited by Wilma King, and she tells the history of Mennonites in Oklahoma. And what was interesting was reading about the history of the work here in Oklahoma City. And one of the really interesting things, just a little bit more than a little bit less, well, August 1965. We're almost at the 50-year mark of that day. What happened in August 1965?
The VS unit started here.
Yes, this building was purchased and the VS unit was started. And that's almost 50 years of presence in this place. And so I wanted to read a little bit, a couple of little excerpts of this book telling about the work. And this book was written in 1988.
What is VS?
A volunteer service. So it's a project where young people would do, at first I think it was mostly draft age people doing alternative service, but later it was also just young people who wanted to do service, who wanted to take a season of their life and do service rather than just jumping into the career mode. And so this was written in 1988. This is before, I think Joy as an official congregation started late 80s, early 90s. So Joy wasn't even officially a congregation yet. But this is a couple things. This first part is talking about the history of Trinity United Presbyterian Mennonite, so I'll read this. The Trinity United Presbyterian Mennonite Church of Oklahoma City has its roots in an earlier mission venture by the Western District Home Mission Committee, followed by another effort together with the Church Workers Committee of yada, 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 yada. Jacob B. Krause was pastor of this latter group starting in the 1950s. The work was ceased in 1960 when the Mennonite Brethren element withdrew to form their own church. So this brings us to our history. 1964, the Western District Home Mission Committee, together with different committees, asked O. Ray and Edith Graber to serve at a mission project in Oklahoma City. The goal was to establish a church, develop a ministry in an interracial community, and render service and outreach in the community. The Grabers began their ministry in 1965 and were later aided by Donald and Elvira Shearling. A church center was established at 504 Northeast 16th Street, right here, close to commercial, medical, and governmental areas of the city. Sunday morning services were started in 1966. A voluntary service unit was started. The unit worked with disadvantaged children in the Fresh Air program, hospitals, education, employment training, and home repair service. Their worship and work was in close connection with the Trinity United Presbyterian Church for several years. In 1968, Stan and Marlene Smucker came as part of the team ministry, as a new part of the team ministry. The Mennonite group merged January 3, 1971 with the Trinity Church. This was brought about through the cooperation of the Western District Home Mission Committee and the Ouachita, now called Indian Nations Presbytery. James the Friend, Presbyterian, and Stan Smucker, Mennonite, were the congregation's leaders. The name of the union was the Trinity United Presbyterian Mennonite Church of Oklahoma City. In 1973, the membership was 249. That's hard to believe. Lael Smith became pastor there in 1979. The church union dissolved June 12, 1980, citing internal difficulties over benevolences, the voluntary service unit, and the inability to coordinate styles of church polity. A voluntary service unit still operates at the church center. And then jump into another part of the book, which tells kind of a little bit of the same history time period. As its first major service program in Oklahoma City, the General Conference in Western District made plans in 1965 to open a pre-kindergarten nursery school. O. Ray Graber became a mission worker in Oklahoma City, and volunteer workers were sought. By August, a large home was purchased, this building here, and became the Mennonite Church Center. The Don Shearlings and 5 voluntary service workers were to live there. So for the second time, work began in Oklahoma City, this time at the General Conference in Western District. In 1967, at convention, O. Ray Graber presented the project Negotiations Now and urged people to sign and in this way help to the effort to end the Vietnam War. In 1968 at Romanos and again in 1970, Oklahoma City, Palmer Becker conducted pre-draft boot camps for Oklahoma youth. Both of these projects were met with mixed reactions. The years of the Vietnam War were difficult ones for Oklahoma Mennonites. Many were confused by the conflicting viewpoints around them. This was even more troubling for those who did not really understand the central place of peace and justice in the gospel message. This background of times helps us understand the happenings at Intermediate Retreat in 1970. Larry Wilson, director, was using a theme on service. In order to make the theme practical, he took retreaters and staff on a visit to the voluntary service unit in preschool in Oklahoma City. Many retreaters seemed able to learn from the situation, but some staff were shocked by lifestyles of some VS workers and were openly hostile. Actually, it became a valuable learning experience when processed back at camp under Wilson's leadership. And it goes on from there. Another separate. It's a really interesting book, and the history there. What's fascinating to me, though, was how this place has always been a hotbed of interesting stuff, and of people really straining and yearning what does it mean to be a follower of Jesus, and people who are willing to say, I know I'm going to offend some people, but I'm going to do what I think is right. Doing the kind of draft counseling at that time was a pretty gutsy move. And the idea that for a time, about 10 years, there being an interdenominational and interracial church in Oklahoma City was a big deal. Of a church of mostly Black Presbyterians, mostly white Mennonites coming together was an incredible thing. But throughout all of that, this place has been a part of who we are. And so one of the topics I want to kind of pose for our conversations in the future is to think about the issue of place. And literally, think about it, we have literally put our roots down here. We have planted our gardens here. A baby has been born in this building. A lot of people have lived here over the years. And so whatever direction, shapes our church takes in the future, one of the things I think we do need to continue to ask is, how does our past inform our present and direct us in the future? How does our connection to this place at the boundary lines of so many things continue to shape us and what that might look like? So anyway, that's the preface. I want to get down to the actual meat of the message. And I apologize, Becky, I was this morning talking about my wife, and she said, James, it sounds like 2 sermons. And
Yes, don't apologize.
but she's right, it's 2 sermons. So for this week, for the actual message, we're now talking about the spiritual practices for the home. And these are practices that I'm taking from the Jewish tradition, and then asking how can these spiritual practices be adapted or translated into our context. The first week we looked at was daily prayer or fixed hour praying. What does it mean when we have special prayers we say every day? Today we'll be talking about Sabbath. The third message in a month or so, whenever I'm preaching in, will be about the spirituality of eating. Why, how we eat affects our spirituality. And finally, the fourth one will be about holidays and calendar, how those practices can shape our home spirituality. So for today, for Sabbath, we heard the scripture a moment ago from Sadie talking about the 7th day of creation. And on that 7th day was a day that God rested and declared it holy. This is in many ways really significant, primarily because it is the first spiritual practice described in scripture. Before the first sacrifices, before the first prayers, what do we see? Sabbath, or the Hebrew Shabbat. This shows its importance, its significance, from the very beginning, a part of how God created the world. It's also interesting if we look at our calendar. The year is based upon the movement of the sun. Our months are based upon the movement of the moon. Our days are based on the movement of the earth. All those things, days, months, years, are based on natural calendar. What is not based on natural calendar is the week. A lot of commentators I looked at said that this is because that the writers of this text from Genesis are trying to differentiate the faith of the Hebrews from the faith of their neighbors. And their neighbors worship the sun and moon. And so the creation account of Genesis 1 shows God making light and dark before the sun and moon to show how important that God comes first. And in the same way, Sabbath is created, this rhythm of time that's not dependent on the sun and moon is what Sabbath is based on. So it's really interesting from that standpoint, but also the idea that God is setting as part of our patterns this idea of rest and very beginning. From there, I want to jump over to Exodus chapter 20. And actually, we're going to look at Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5 very briefly, comparing the commandment of Sabbath in the Ten Commandments, because there's a little bit, what I want to look at is what's different in these two accounts. So first of all, it's Exodus 20, verse 8. It begins, "Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or daughter, your male or female slave, or your cattle, or the stranger who is within your settlements. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and sea, and all that is in them. And he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." So in this Exodus account, the why do we do this, is because God rested on the seventh day. That we're following the pattern shown by God. Now, Deuteronomy 5 is a little bit different. Deuteronomy 5's version of the Ten Commandments, this starts at verse 12, says, "Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your ass, or any of your cattle, or the stranger in your settlements, so that your male and female slave may rest as you do. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. The Lord your God freed you from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day." Here, we don't see the connection of creation anymore. What we instead see is this connection to social justice. It is a reminder that the Sabbath day is not just for the Jewish people, but rather it's, now again, there's a troubling element here. The fact that Jews, former slaves, now have slaves of their own. That's a very troubling aspect. I don't want to downplay that at all. But what it was emphasizing here as the slaves you have, the servants, your foreign guest workers, the people that you might be tempted to exploit, make work 7 days a week, you can't do that. You're called to remember that once you were at the bottom, and therefore because of that, in Sabbath it extends to everybody. Everybody gets a day off. It's also a connection to this theme of liberation. It's a reminder that the story of the people is not just that God created them, but that God also liberated them from captivity. And so these themes of creation and liberation will continue through further considerations of Sabbath in the times to come. From that point, and there's a lot of texts we could look at. Due to time, I'm not going to delve into them. But Sabbath becomes the central practice of Judaism, but especially becomes much more important during the times of captivity. The temple was destroyed. During those times, in fact, at some points when they couldn't even worship publicly, people still worshipped in homes together. And Sabbath became that focus because it gave them the space to continue to be a people, to continue to worship. And many commentators today, if you ask them, what is the most important holiday in the Jewish calendar? You would think, Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. No, the most important holiday in the Jewish calendar, according to most rabbis, would be Shabbat or Sabbath. That is the most important day because it is the day that orients the calendar of the Jewish people. It's a day that reminds them every week, this is who we are. And in fact, a lot of writers talk about, from this Jewish context, the idea that the coming of Sabbath is like the coming of a queen or coming of a bride. You're welcoming into your home. That's what coming into the Sabbath experience is like. Okay, that's all good and fine, but what about the New Testament? How do we approach this from the standpoint of Jesus? Well, we see many stories of Jesus engaging with the ideas of Sabbath. We have to remember, of course, Jesus was a Jew. He was a Jewish teacher. He was someone who engaged on a regular basis in conversation with others about Jewish teachings. And Jesus was not alone in this conversation. Other people were having these conversations. Questions of what do you do with the technical rules of following the Sabbath come in conflict with the laws of being an ethical, good human being, such as if someone's life is in danger, do you help them? Jesus was not the first to sort out some of these issues and argue them. But I think what Jesus does really well is he emphasizes the human nature of Sabbath, why it was created. And for that, I want to go to Mark chapter 2. There's a lot of the text we could go with, but the one I really like is Mark chapter 2, beginning of verse 23. And so this is talking about Jesus. It says, one Sabbath, he was going to the grain fields. And as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. So they're walking through this field, and they're picking grain, and rubbing it between their hands. And that's, again, the technical rules of it. They're working. They're picking grain, and now they're rubbing it, separating the wheat from the chaff as they're walking along. And so they're breaking all kinds of rules from the technical way of reading it. And so the Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And he, Jesus, said to them, have you not read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and he gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for humankind, and not humankind for Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. What Jesus is saying here, he's giving a new or a different change in orientation. He's reminding his hearers that Sabbath wasn't created as an arbitrary thing, a God on an ego trip saying, you must do this or else. That wasn't what it was about. Rather, it was saying, humans, we are made to need to rest. We are made to live in rhythms of life. And so Sabbath was made for human beings. And if your following of the technical rules gets in the way of living a good, ethical, loving life, then throw out the rules for a little bit. But it doesn't mean, but fundamentally, Jesus is not saying don't do Sabbath. What he is saying is that we need to reorient things a little bit. We need to look at the big picture. Now, from there, Christians throughout the centuries have spent a lot of time talking about the idea of Sabbath. What do we do about it? Paul talks about it some, Colossians 2. I'm not going to read it, but he talks about this idea of people condemning others because they were doing Sabbaths. Or not doing Sabbaths. And so it had been a controversy in the church, particularly as the church began to have both Gentile and Jewish believers. And it was a controversy time. It continues throughout the centuries. Well, at the risk of oversimplification, I'm going to boil down the primary views that Christians have held about Sabbath. What do you do with the idea of Sabbath? And I think there's some good arguments actually for all of these positions. But the first argument is that of the Seventh-day Adventists and people like that who say that Jesus that Jesus did not change the rules. We still observe the Jewish Sabbath on the seventh day of the week. Many other Christians have argued that no, Sabbath in the seventh day of the week has been replaced by the Lord's Day, the first day of the week. And so the 10th commandment to observe the Sabbath day, that just has been retranslated to go to church on Sunday. Other people have argued that for Christians, the Sabbath is not relevant at all because that's a Jewish thing. We're Christians, that they're completely different. And then finally, the fourth perspective, and frankly it's the one that I'm going to argue for today, is the idea that we are not commanded to observe the Sabbath, but it can be a life-giving good thing, and that we are allowed to observe the Sabbath. We might frame it that way. Now, we look at those four ideas. The first one, there's a lot of good arguments from that Seventh-day Adventist perspective of saying the best one being that Jesus himself likely observed the Sabbath. He may have interpreted it differently. He may have done it differently. There's no indications that he ignored the Sabbath. And nowhere did he say, don't do the Sabbath anymore. It's the old thing. We don't do it anymore. Jesus didn't say that. And so I think that's a good argument why maybe we should do it. On the other hand, the best argument for that second perspective, and that is that Sabbath has been superseded by the Lord's Day, the first day, is that with the coming of Jesus, the orientation did change to focus on the resurrection of Jesus. And therefore, the orientation shifted from the seventh day with its important themes now towards the first day. There's a good argument there. Also, the third perspective, that Sabbath is no longer relevant. Well, I think one argument from that perspective would be relevant to say that the idea of Sabbath and the first day are two different things. Conflating the two may not be so helpful. So each of these perspectives has some merits. But for me, I would argue that fourth perspective, that is, that the Sabbath is optional but good, is a good one. And the reason I would argue that is that if we take this perspective, what Jesus said, that Sabbath is made for human beings, not the other way around, then we could say that Sabbath is a gift from God. And this is something that we can choose to partake of if we want to. And I would argue that it serves as a incredible corrective to one of the great evils of our time. What is that? Hubris. Hubris, and I looked it up because I want to make sure I have the right definition. It's from the Greek hubris. It means extreme pride or self-confidence. In fact, in ancient Greece, the stories of the gods would be offended by humans showing hubris, and they'd be punished for it. It was one of the great cardinal sins in the Greco-Roman world. And also, this is the Wikipedia definition, says that hubris is usually perceived as characteristic of an individual rather than a group. Although the group the offender belongs to may suffer consequences for the wrongful act, hubris often indicates a loss of contact with reality and an overestimation of one's own competence, accomplishments, or capabilities, especially when the person exhibiting it is in a position of power. I'm going to think about the American culture, our civilization, our empire today. Hubris would be a mighty good way to describe it. We tend to think that there are no limitations. You look at the way we drill oil, the way that we exploit the earth, we're behaving like there's no limitations whatsoever to what we do. And yet we all know the reality. There are limitations. There's only so much oil on the ground. There's only so much CO2 that's pumped into the atmosphere. And there are consequences to our actions. Human beings are not infinite. We have limitations. And I think that we see that big picture, but sometimes it's harder in our individual lives. But we look at, just from a statistical standpoint, Americans tend to work more hours than almost anyone else on earth. We work ourselves to death compared to other parts of the world. We don't take vacations. It's a real problem. And I think for my own self, it's a problem. And I think, and maybe I would argue that hubris is a particular temptation for Mennonites because we have a faith tradition that emphasizes action and doing. We emphasize orthopraxy, right doing and right to action over right thought or orthodoxy, which is a good thing. But like many good things, there's a shadow. There's a negative thing when they become distorted. Look at my own life as an attorney doing activist work. I think I very much fell into this mode of working way too hard, of not setting appropriate boundaries for myself with my clients, of not taking good care of myself, not eating well, not sleeping well, traveling way too much. There's a cost paid, and frankly, my health, physical health, mental health, was paid because I did not respect the boundaries of saying, I can only do so much. The problem was, and this is what's so tricky about hubris, is it's easy to get sucked into it because you think the cause is worth it. I must push through because the cause is worth it. The problem is that God, I think, would remind us that you're human. You have limitations. You can only do so much. And when you try to go past that, it becomes destructive. In other words, the good becomes the wrong when we push too far. The good news, though, is that there is a corrective. And I think one of those correctives is the idea of Shabbat or Sabbath. And for me in my life, what I learned was, frankly, in being married early on, we made decisions of saying my old life wasn't working. That was very clear. And so we made decisions of how could we change things? How could I work less hours? All of that. But there was still kind of a missing element there that hadn't quite worked through. And that was how to really reorient my motivations and reorient the rhythms of things. And for us, it came through doing Sabbath. And it's a long story. I won't go into kind of what drew us into that, but for us, it became a very life-giving way. And for us, our focus has been mostly on doing a Sabbath meal every week, usually on Friday night, sometimes other nights. And it's simple. We light candles, we say special blessings over bread and wine, we sing songs together, we eat good food, we talk. Sometimes we get up and we put music on the player and we dance. The three of us, we have a good time. And it's silly and ridiculous, but there's something about that that's reorienting and saying this time is special for us. We do special things to make the holiday time festive. We buy flowers at the store, put them on the table. We use the nice plates. We often prepare special food and drinks we wouldn't eat the other times of the week. And we also try to find ways to continue that meal into the rest of the evening and sometimes the next day, to stay in that restful mood. Sometimes we might play board games, reading books, doing arts and crafts. In other words, these activities are a way of continuing the space of not moving into regular time, but rather staying in a special space. And then sometimes we extend our time of Shabbat into the next morning. And traditionally, Shabbat was celebrated from Friday evening until the evening of the next day, Saturday. So as soon as we go to the farmer's market, we do family stuff together, we try to continue that space into the rest of the day. Now, for us, what works is that we allow ourselves flexibility. And this goes back to the whole idea of optional but good. I would argue one of my favorite sayings from our friend Bob Waldrop is, don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. In other words, it's better to do Shabbat on a different day of the week than to not do it at all. It's better to say, well, we can't do it Saturday, but we can at least do Friday night. It's better to do something than nothing. So we allow ourselves flexibility. We allow ourselves flexibility on some of the day of the week we do it on the prayers we pray. Sometimes Ty is not terribly cooperative, and so we shorten the prayers. Sometimes if he's having a good time, we may add extra prayers. In other words, we give ourselves flexibility and say that this is important to us. And then sometimes even there's weeks that we just are worn out and we haven't made plans for it yet. Some Sundays, some Friday nights, say, Becky, we want to do Shabbat. She'll say, well, okay, yeah, we're going to do it. And so we'll just throw together something quick for supper and we'll just sit down. And sometimes, even though we're tired and we're not really into it at the moment, just the process of sitting down to eat a meal together, saying the prayers, at the beginning it might be kind of a form of thing. It's just, well, we should do it. Usually when we do that, entering into that space is enough to change the dynamic. And even if it's not a very special time, even if we don't have flowers on the table, just saying that this is important, and even if it's not perfect, even if it's just, even if it's just here's a ham sandwich for everybody, whatever it might be. That's kind of funny. But whatever it might be, it's saying that this time is special, this time is sacred, and even if it's something simple, even if it's something obviously not kosher, it's good to have that space. And for us, it changes things, it reorients things. Now, it's interesting if you look at in Judaism, that there's different ways of doing it as well. The Orthodox have exacting rules on how to do it, but the more liberal Jews take a very relaxed approach, asking what is life affirming and joyful. So I don't think our approach is that out of the bounds compared to at least the liberal Jews. Certainly preparation can be a part of it. In the Orthodox tradition, the day before Shabbat is a day of busy preparations. But even for people like us who are doing it in a more relaxed way, there's still a matter of preparing. And sometimes it's just a matter of preparing our own hearts to say, during Friday night, I'm not going to answer the phone anymore. The clients call, they can go jump in the lake, I'll call them the next day. It's making a decision that right now, phone code turns off, we're giving ourselves this space. So you have to prepare yourself in various ways. In the Jewish tradition, also, food is a big part of it. But it's also as time for going for walks, being out in nature. One of the things that's a tradition, I think is a wonderful thing as a husband, is that it's celebrated as a especially good time for couples to make love, as the ultimate celebration of the extravagance of Shabbat. And many people especially embrace the idea of Sabbath being a time to turn off our technology, of turning off TVs, computers, cell phones, and setting apart this time as being different than our regular lives. And I think there's a lot of merit to that too. For myself, though, I'm not drawn to the legalistic approach of the Orthodox. To me, they seem to make it too complicated. But I do like the liberal Jewish idea that asks people to adopt those elements of Shabbat that are life-giving and helpful, and to not do those things that are not. Now, many Christians have also embraced this idea of Shabbat. And I have a book I'll show y'all real quick. I've just gotten into it. It's really good. I've read some other books, but the author's name is Marva Dawn, and this book is Keeping the Sabbath Holy, Ceasing, Resting, Embracing, and Feasting. It's a really good book. I've read another of her books on the idea of Sabbath that's really good. There's a lot of other books on this topic. But what I'll close with is to say that what I'm hoping to do with this message is not to say that you should do Sabbath. It may not be a good fit for you. I think Paul is right. It's not something we bind upon others. but it would invite us to consider what life would look like if we embraced it. And also think about some of the implications. A few years ago, we read the book on Shed Money for the Sabbath Economics, and the idea of Sabbath and its implications played out in other ways as well, not just on personal lives, but on communal lives. What does it mean when we don't try to get everything we possibly can get? What does it mean when we reorient our priorities? And so my invitation today is to consider Shabbat, to consider it as an opportunity, to consider it as a gift, and what it might mean if we choose to live our lives by a different kind of rhythm.